saying, you can pull up our paper and you can either still get it in the mail, single copy sales, over the counter purchases, or you can get it right away along with our news bites on the internet. So while we realize that the internet is there and is growing, we're making a point to grow with it so that we can stay in contact with you, our listeners, and you, our community. And we're excited about doing that. Okay, so Dr. Thompson, we got a lot to talk about. I want to
Yeah.
yield to you before we go into it.
Well, Dr. Warren, as you always know, when we get started, we're doing the multiple platforms. Every now and then we have a couple of glitches that we're fixing right now, but we are on live. We want to thank everybody for tuning in. We're going to have a good night tonight. I think I'm going to call this show our wake-up show.
Yes.
I think that this is a show that we have to really start talking about how we're going to wake up our society. Because I think a lot of things are going on right now that nobody has a clue, nobody is staying aware of, and they don't realize that people are focusing on elections and things of that nature, but they don't even know that we're on the brink of maybe being cornered on all sides and being attacked. So I just want to say that this is the show that we're going to do as a wake-up call to try to help our communities and our society to know what's taking place.
Well, let me start off by reminding you that last week, and I did an article on the death of America as we know it. I featured the Project 2025 that the Heritage Foundation has put out, and it's a blueprint for the next Republican president, assuming from their standpoint that will be Donald Trump. And that lays out a blueprint for eliminating the Department of Education, the Federal Communications Commission, Federal Trade Commission, bringing martial law back, the 1800 provision, getting rid of the FBI, defunding the Department of Justice, and bringing in a whole cadre of government employees to replace the ones that are going to be fired, because the new cadre will be only those people who are embrace and support what Trump has to say. I thought it was very significant that we just saw a clip on the internet from Robert De Niro, who is often viewed as Mr. New York because he loves the city so. And De Niro was telling a group of protesters that, number one, if you ever allow Trump to get back in the White House, he will never leave. Which has been said even by his niece, who is a clinical psychologist. We also know that he says the freedoms that you have like now to stand and gather and to chat and talk, those freedoms are gone, all right? We know that Congress is being neutralized. We know that the Supreme Court has been compromised between Alito and Clarence Thomas and Roberts, who is the Chief Justice, not having control anymore. We can't look for any decisions out of the court that are fair. We know that the judicial system is being compromised every day. The one thing that's about to take place is the sentencing of Donald Trump on the 34th felony convictions in New York. His case in Washington, his federal case, has been sidetracked by the whole immunity issue that's before the Supreme Court that they have pushed back on and will not hear probably until after the election. Cannon in Florida has gone out of her way with a lot of Mickey Mouse minutia to make sure that nothing happens toward getting a court date there. Georgia has been tied up following the distraction that took place with District Attorney Bonnie Willis and the efforts to make her personal life a substitute for the criminal efforts. Meanwhile, in a number of other communities, fake electorates have been indicted, and they're expecting to come to trial. And Trump is promising people every day that when he gets elected, that he will pardon all of the people who are in jail from January 6th. Over some 400 have been indicted so far. So we know what we can expect from that scenario. And we see that even though President Biden's son was rightfully convicted in Delaware on a guns charge because of it was purchased during his addiction, and he's going to appeal it, that's being looked at not in terms of the president being fair, but now is a part of a greater conspiracy and distraction. When Biden has made it very clear that even though he has the authority to pardon his son and he loves him dearly, he will not.
Yeah.
He will let justice take its course. That is much more than we can say for Trump, who has thumbed his nose at every turn at the judicial system. He has now compromised it by having compromised the highest court in the land. He has nullified Congress by compromising the Republican leadership and the Republican Party in and out, even though he's going to be sentenced 4 days before the Republican National Convention. His daughter-in-law is running the Republican National Committee. And so we are marching slowly toward this dictatorship. And the only thing more painful than the march is watching black people line up and say that they're going to support Trump because the food went up and the gas went up, when who the hell do you think drove it up from the time that he spent and Biden has spent the past 4 years trying to undo the mess that Trump created? Trump has demonstrated he has no compassion, care, or concern for the American people at large, only for his selective recall and his mental deficiency state. That's all he's concerned about. And the only thing worse than Trump while we're looking at him is intelligent people like Johnson, the Speaker of the House, and the leadership in the House, the Republicans, members of Congress, and elected officials at the state and local levels who took an oath of office that included a promise to swear to oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, while the domestic enemies are now outstripping the foreign. So these are things that we're concerned about, yes. Yes, we're concerned about rents being up, gas being up, food being up. But if you think stuff is bad now, put Trump in office and see how much worse it gets. And it's going to be too late to go, oops and and I didn't know.
You know, the one thing about it that I tell everybody is that once you understand politics and once you understand how it works, you realize that the first 2 years of any presidency, they're either dismantling what has been done before them or improving on what has been done before them. The high gas prices and the things that we're seeing currently right now, the high food costs and everything else, is really truly based on the fact that Donald Trump didn't show true leadership when we went through that pandemic time. You know, there were so many things that he did wrong, and one of the biggest things is he denied that it was even a pandemic and we need to operate. So the amount of time that he delayed in telling the American public the truth and getting help in the right places, millions of people lost their life, or I would say hundreds of thousands lost their life, and he was still making jokes. You know, and I think that people need to understand that the jokes that he made, he said, well, just drink some bleach. You know, we'll bleach it out the system. He said all kind of crazy things, but at the end of the day, it wasn't true. Even when he got COVID, he said, oh, it was no big deal. He could barely breathe. He could barely move.
That's true.
And he had a cadre of doctors there trying him and testing him out on everything they could get to make sure that he did not collapse and die.
They did make that point, and it's just so true, Dr. Thompson, everything that you're saying. Meanwhile, the Republicans in the House, since they control the committees, they're going to hold the Attorney General in contempt because he won't give them tapes that they're asking for. They attacked and brutalized Dr. Fauci because they didn't like the suggestions that he brought from the CDC during the pandemic. They have Alvin Braggs, who was the district attorney in New York that brought the suit against Trump. He's been subpoenaed to come before, and he indicated that he will not show up until after sentencing, which makes sense. So he's going to be raked over the coals, even though he's a state official and there's no federal cause for the action that they're about to take. Mm-hmm. They've already gutted the Voting Rights Act. Clarence Thomas is now talking about undoing things like some people will know the name of the case, Griswold v. Connecticut, which was a contraceptive case. Mm-hmm. And they want to throw that out. Mm-hmm. When that decision was passed down by the Supreme Court, the court said, as I recall, that the government had no compelling interest in what happened in the privacy of a person's bedroom. And so, but they don't care about that. It's such a hell bent position of destruction. We cannot point to one good thing that the Republican Party has done while in office. They rejected the immigration bill that the president and the Republicans brought and would not let it out of the Senate, I believe it was. And then after the president recently took executive order action to shut down the border, then they're complaining about that. So it doesn't matter what Biden does or what a Democrat does, they are going to take an opposite position on it no matter what.
Yes. And I still think that, honestly, is it true? I believe that Donald Trump should be charged with treason. I believe that he's leaking information and sharing information with Putin and other people that are against America. And I want to make that transition just to talk about, you mentioned when you came in about Cuba.
Well, yeah, because we have a couple of generations that are too young to know. And I remember when Kennedy was president, and Russia was sending missiles to Cuba. It was called the Cuban Missile Crisis because we had a standoff in the Bay of Pigs, if you will. And there are some documentaries that get aired that show President Kennedy and his cabinet and the stress that they were under because we were just a heartbeat away from nuclear war. And what a lot of people don't realize about the island Cuba is that a portion of the island is inhabited by Guantanamo Bay, which is a U.S. military installation. It's where we have housed a number of terrorists. It's where a number of terrorists are considered to have been tortured. And the idea was that as long as they were not tortured on U.S. soil, then they could get away with it. And so now we have Putin sending Russian Navy ships to Cuba, and the statement that he made today is that if America can put troops right at the border to support Ukraine, then we can let them see how it feels to put troops right at their back concerning Cuba. And we know from experience that Cuba is close enough for any armed missiles or anything to just about reach anywhere in the United States. And so Cold War enemies are becoming closer friends. Putin is visiting North Korea next week. There's a feeling that there's an exchange going with North Korea giving weapons to Putin for the war against Ukraine and Putin giving them nuclear technology and knowledge to help them develop their nuclear program. He's already been to China, and he's going to Vietnam next. And so we see Iran involved. And what we see is what Bush called, I remember doing this on a program over a decade ago. We talked about the axis of evil. And all of these entities are coming together. And at the same time that they are planning what they're going to do collectively against America, we are too busy with the Republican Party denying reality and fighting everything that we try to do in terms of carrying out the responsibilities of government.
Yeah, and the sad thing about it is, I want people to open up their eyes and open up their minds and realizing that the direction that Donald Trump is leading this country is really designed to weaken this country and make it very, very vulnerable. And that's why I believe that the axis of quote unquote evil are coming together, because they realize that if Trump was able to get back in office, we would be the weakest that we had ever been before, and we would be easy to be able to be attacked.
Oh, they would all want Trump to get in office. And you see, I pointed out last week, I thought, that the European allies have already decided that Trump is going to be president, and they're making plans for how to deal with America under a Trump who wants to dismantle NATO. And NATO is so important because under NATO, if a member of NATO is attacked under Article 5 of the North American Treaty Organization Agreement, which is NATO that we are a party of, all members of NATO have to get involved.
Yeah.
And so we're being pulled toward this war, folks, in a very big way. At the same time that we're being pulled toward the war with people coming at us, they are looking at us internally the same way it happened with Hamas. When Israel was fighting with Netanyahu about how he was trying to stay in order and take powers from the Constitution, the members of the military, which is such a key part of the Israeli life and structure, they were backed off on protests, and that's when the attack came. And so we're setting ourselves up for that same scenario.
Well, and let's think about it. If America goes to war, and if we are attacked on our own home soil, which we very rarely see, we saw it at Pearl Harbor, we saw it at 9/11. You know what I'm saying? But we were attacked, but not a consistent bombardment of being like people hitting the shores and trying to take our land and blowing things up. The minute that happens, they're going to reinstate the draft, and black and brown people are going to be the ones that are going to be the first one on the draft line. They're going to then decimate our communities again with men dying, you know what I'm saying? And then they're going to try to say they're going to fix it.
Well, they might reinstate the draft, Dr. Thompson, but this past week we celebrated the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and that was the time when, 150,000 men, 3,000 people, 18,000 ships, 150,000 paratroopers, all these people came together and landed in France against the Germans and fought at great cost. And as a veteran, when I look at some of these old war movies that were based like Flags of Our Fathers and Iwo Jima and the battle, I saw people who died. I saw people who died because they believed they were dying for America. And I want to tell you, the America that we have today, the young people that we see pictured on the Midway that flew those planes, and many of them were under 25, I don't see that level of national commitment anymore.
Yeah.
Okay? We don't care about the country collectively in the same fashion that we did. And so we don't realize that when the country goes down, we all go down with it.
Yeah.
And we all on this flagship America, and we can all sail with it or we can sink with it. And there seems to be a growing number of people, especially the Republican or conservative right. That's why this week I have an editorial called The Ultra-Conservative Right and the New Jim Crow, because they are for instituting all of the segregated policies and the stripping away of human rights and political rights and freedoms that Jim Crow denied black folks following the Reconstruction after the Civil War. And so they're taking books away so you can't read. You need to be mindful of what you're listening to and how you're just walking around listening to boom, boom, boom instead of putting something in the mind and looking at what is actually taking place. These are serious times, folks.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. And biblically, for the Christian peoples that are listening, a lot of things that we're facing right now are just the Bible coming to life, with the disturbance in the Middle East and all the things that are taking place. This is truly a time that we have to be very mindful of Bible prophecy and understand that this is the time not to sit back and be deactivated, but to get activated through prayer, but also through involvement.
Well, you're speaking of the Bible, Dr. Thompson. The Southern Baptist Convention is just coming to an end, and they've been fighting this week over abolishing women pastors within the faith. A few years ago, they rewrote the Bible to make it gender neutral, so that certainly didn't have nothing to do with the Word of God. And as they were getting ready to close today, they were fighting inter vitro fertilization because they didn't agree with that. And at the same time that they're going through this insanity, church attendance, according to Pew Trust surveys, church attendance is down tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
People are not going back to church following the pandemic. They're not buying into the old campaigns that we had. Uh, the evangelical faith is still accelerating just because of how it is, I believe, Holy Spirit, faith, inspiration driven, without all of the church politics and madness that we're finding in other places. And so we need to return again as a people of God to prayer. Our currency says, "In God we trust." Our actions say we trust anybody but God these days.
Mm-hmm.
And when we turn away from Him, He turns away from us. And this is the point at which many of you say, "Well, I don't want to hear any more from Him." Well, you don't have to hear it from me, but you can certainly experience it. It's no accident. We got more tornadoes coming than we had. We're losing people in up Tornado Alley, Hurricane Alley. Supposed to be at least 13 this year. That's a number that's way up. We're getting more activity. Volcanoes are overflowing, if you will. Flooding is taking place. Drought in places like the Sudan where people can no longer raise food while others are washed away. So the Arctic ices are melting. There are things happening to this planet and to us, folks. And we are, for the most part, still on recess. Even this past week, right here in California, it's been gloomy and cool. And other parts of the country's been hit with heat waves that kill people. You got to go out in the desert to get triple digits here. And we're just kind of kicking along. So these are serious times.
Yeah, and one of the things about it is that, LaShawn said the government has been one big shenanigans. Vote, please, and thank you. I think that it's just so important that we have to wake up. And it's not just this looking at social media. It's not just listening to the news. But I think we have to now really do some research because there is so much false prophecy, false information out there. But, I think that when we talk about Donald Trump, I think that we should do the same mental psychology that he is doing with people with Joe Biden when he says Crooked Joe. He is ingraining that statement into everybody who hears him talk about Crooked Joe, Crooked Joe. Never calls him President Biden, never calls him Mr. Biden, never does it. It's always Joe. I think that we should start responding to him as Dumb Donald. Well, there we go again. Dumb Donald's getting ready to speak. And let's ingrain in the people that how dumb he is. So, I just like he's disrespectful to the President of the United States, I think that we need to say, Dumb Donald, all the D's that we can come up that will rhyme with Donald, we should be putting in there because the bottom line is we need to also put that information out. This man is not smart. Most of his companies have filed bankruptcy. The only reason why he still has money is because he inherited 98% of it all, and he has some smart people around him, but they're so crooked, so Dumb Donald is one of the crooked, so he's Crooked Donald, and untrustworthy Donald, and ignorant Donald, and all the other things. We need to really stop letting people thinking that he's such a great a business person.
Well, Dr. Thompson, one of the things I learned in politics some 60 years ago, and I was around some of the masters, is that, when you have an opponent, even when you talk about the opponent, when you use that person's name, you give them free publicity. Mm-hmm. All right. And so I think that it's not Trump's name that we need to mention so much as it is the fact that we need to understand that Trump is a distraction, and we need to look behind Trump to what he brings with him. And what he brings with him is like the four horsemen of Revelation in terms of death and famine and destruction, all right? And so what we need to do is our secret weapon right now is voter registration. Mm. We've talked about him, but let's get registered and let's vote. California has 52 congressional delegates, the largest delegation in the House of Representatives. 40 of those people are Democratic. 12 of them are Republicans. Mm-hmm. Let's be sure that we preserve the 40 that we have. Let's go
and
after the
regain the ones,
12.
yeah, regain the ones that we lost.
Yeah, and let's go after the 12 and see if we can't replace them. Let's get Hakeem Jeffries a majority in the House so that Johnson is not sitting in the Speaker's chair when the Electoral College is convened to certify the election. Because it doesn't matter if Biden wins the popular vote in an overwhelming fashion. We have now finally realized that the Electoral College is the one that's going to make the decisions, and that the Founding Fathers weren't as fair and nice as we thought they were, because they kept a back door just in case we got to be too much of e pluribus unum, the Latin for out of many one. They didn't want one. Their interest was not as much in democracy as it was monetary. The interest has always been in capitalism. That's why there's the Commerce Clause in the Constitution. And so we need to wake up. If we want things to be better, we have to do better now. We need to register. We need to vote. We need to talk to our family and friends and loved ones in other states and congressional districts and make sure that they're getting involved. We need to follow the example that Georgia followed when it placed a black and a Jew in the U.S. Senate. We need to make sure we get Adam Schiff elected here as opposed to the former baseball Republican who swears by Trump and wants to be the second senator. All we need is to lose a senatorial seat and let the Republicans regain House and Senate. But at the same time, I'm not giving the president a pass because he could have done something about the George Floyd and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act when he had a majority in the House and the Senate when he was first elected, and he didn't. And he yielded to the filibuster. And I will never understand how he could be in the Senate 38 years in the Congress and he would know how to deal with the filibuster. When Lyndon Johnson, who had been Secretary of the Senate, became vice president, when he became president, he pulled out all the stops to make sure that the votes were there to pass the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Act. So Biden hasn't done all that he could, and he wouldn't be president if it wasn't for black people.
Yeah.
And it's going to take more than him and Kamala Harris smiling at each other and sending me emails asking for some money.
Yeah. And, and the thing about it is really is simply this, that we are in a state of emergency.
Yes.
And we need to say, just like the pandemic shut everything down, we have to look at being in a state of emergency, and we cannot sit back and think that everything's going to be all right no matter who's president.
That's true.
In this case, this person is not American. He is not patriotic. He is a person that is, I won't even call him a racist. I will call him a narcissist, and he desires to be a dictator, and he will take dictation from anybody that's going to agree with him.
Oh, no, it's no question. And we also see on a global scale with all of the elections that are being held, we just had elections in India, South Africa. We have elections coming in Venezuela. We just had elections in Mexico. And Venezuela, they are promising that they're going to close the Bering Strait, which is that trek that people are making through the jungle to come up to the bottom of Mexico.
Yeah.
And I can't have any real sympathy with the president of Mexico or the new woman coming in as president complaining that we're dumping people over the border, because if they closed the southern border in the first place, if people couldn't come into Mexico, then they wouldn't be coming through there to get here.
Hey, and all I have to say is that they see all those people on the trains.
Yes.
They stop the train and let the train sit there for 2 or 3 days in that hot sun. I bet you they get off that train and go back.
Yeah, or use your connections. You know, we don't realize how much the Latin countries interact and talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And I remember many, many years ago, probably about 50 years ago, I was in Mexico. And I in Mexico City, I was traveling in the country. And I was amazed at that time, the relationship between Mexico and Cuba under Fidel Castro. Mm-hmm. And so not only Castro, but there were a whole bunch of revolutionary people that strung up like him to fight against. America was not right in terms of what America was doing in those developing countries. They were propping up people so they could take advantage, just like in Cuba they had the cocoa plantations and all of that. And Hershey was smart enough to sell their interests off a year before Castro nationalized and took everything. So we need to do some homework, folks. We need to understand some history so we can see where we're going. All right. And we need to understand that we don't all have to agree. But, Dr. King says that, we can all live together or we can die together as fools.
Yeah.
And even in this town here, we've got people who are working against the interests of some of us who are trying so hard to help our community as a whole. We got people that won't come to a meeting, won't pick up a paper, won't pick up a phone, but they got opinions when folks come around that they consider important.
Amen.
And then when they get in trouble or somebody calls them the N-word, then all of a sudden they want to stop the world, let them get on. So we need to be concerned beyond ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that that's the biggest thing is that it seems like we don't ever get activated until something happens that we think is an atrocity, but we have atrocities taking place every single day. But if it's not caught on film, we don't think it's happening. But it is happening, and we have to really begin to look at that. Now, Dr. Warren, just over the last month, we've had a lot of people graduate from high school, going on to college graduates and things of that nature. But what is the forecast for the community? Is there a place for them to work? Is there a place for them to live? Or are we just making all these educated people that ultimately have to go home to their families?
It's a good question because our homeless numbers are up. Mm-hmm. I'm on the air. Our homeless numbers are up. But at the same time that the homeless numbers are up, we have more condos and apartments coming online, and we have nobody talking about. I've asked several times the city, let us see the building permits to see how many of these places are condos, how many of our apartments. Let us come and understand not just affordable housing, but what is the total of available housing. I think it's very good that in the budget passing yesterday, there was an agreement to do the facility for the 1,000 beds to create the homeless shelter. But and I'm sure some other people, I am concerned that we were doing a 35-year contract at $30 million a year. Why didn't we just go ahead and buy the building? Or how is it that the building sat empty for a very long time, and all of a sudden, as soon as it's bought, now we have this idea surface? It sounds like Ash Street all over to me again.
Yeah.
And I think there ought to be an investigation of this whole thing. 1,000 beds, we're going to spend $30 million a year for 35 years. That's insane. That's an insane commitment to make. Where's the city attorney questioning the length of time? And if that's the only game in town, well, how about passing on that game until we get a better game?
Exactly. Exactly. And so, these are the questions that we have to continue to ask, because the bottom line is, one of the things I saw on the news this morning was that there is a gentleman who's doing a research project in San Diego of how many properties are Airbnb. And he created a whole map, and he was showing, I think, 800 or 900 housing units are Airbnbs, and they're owned by corporations, and they're allowed to get their permits because they're using family members' name, but they're a corporation buying these places up so that they can up the rent by making them Airbnbs. And so I think the city has to look at that also.
Well, greed is the underlying problem here, and greed is never satisfied, if you will. And so the people who, just like we have the tenant protection ordinance, and we saw landlords come before the city council and testify about how much they love their tenants. And one came down there with flowers, a bottle of champagne, and a box of candy. Everybody who moves in, we give them the flowers and the champagne and the candy. Well, yeah, by the time they finish paying the rent that you stuck on them, they couldn't go and buy a box of candy if they wanted it. So maybe it's good they can hold on to it. But we're not paying attention to what's going on here, okay? And we need to wake up, because when we start paying attention and getting involved and making demands, then things will change.
Yeah.
But it's already been determined that most of us aren't going to go beyond our own interests because we're too tired to do so.
Yep. Or we're too self-absorbed that
Yes.
we're only going to focus on things that affect us and not things that are affecting our community.
Right.
And I think that that's very important. I think that a lot of times when we drive down, and I don't know about you, Dr. Warren, but every month I drive in our community because I really want to see if what people are talking about has changed. You know what I'm saying? Because we talk about paving roads and this and doing that, but I've traveled in our communities and I'm seeing a lot of things still undone.
Well,
and so I
Dr.
asked the question: if we're going to make progress, we got to stop just talking about it, but we got to really be about it.
Well, you know what? Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because if you really want to feel like a throwback, just drive through Encanto. And you got places out there where there's no sidewalks. The roads are like paths and all this. And it's all in the same city.
Yeah.
We got these places that have not been addressed. And that's why we hit the floods, because we were putting the money in Rancho Bernardo and La Jolla and other places before the flood came. And I was at the meeting Monday night as the flood disaster team is still meeting. We still have this bickering back and forth between the city and the county, and people saying they put money up and then they're holding their hands back. They're telling people to drop out the program, and then when people find out money has been put in the program, they won't let them back in because they dropped out, and they're dealing with the handful that are still in emergency shelters. So we have game playing going on. People still are not back in their homes.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's real serious. And the people who are holding this up, that they don't seem to be concerned.
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep on this tune. I applaud the mayor for the parts of what he's trying to do, but I don't see his chief operating officer out there doing nothing. And he's supposed to be the extension of the mayor in terms of making sure stuff gets done.
Well, I think that we have to, when we look at, chief operating officer and all the different people that are in position to make about change, you know what I'm saying? I want to hear from them, just like with the storm drain people. Now they're saying that they have cleaned so many of the storm drains, but have we really went and saw it for ourselves, or are we just getting the report? I think that a lot of times in our community, we're being spoon-fed, but we're not really documenting what is really taking place or not taking place. There are a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes, and I can't say what people are not doing or are doing unless I'm out there and I'm actually evaluating what is being done. I think that, and I say this all the time, it's so quick and easy for us to point the finger without information versus going in and getting the information and then presenting the evidence. And I think that the evidence is saying that things are not being done at the level that we expected in the communities that we serve. You know what I'm saying? So many times we hear things that are being done, but when we really look at the evidence, they're not being done in our communities.
Well, a lot was done in terms of the storm drains because
Okay.
my staff, we went out there doing the flooding. We went out there and saw the backhoes and the digging out. We went out there when the rains came the next time, and this time they established a number of sandbag emergency stations along the channel, as well as crews ready to jump in. And so the flooding didn't take place. But that flooding capability is not over. I mean, we don't know with climate change. We don't know when we're going to have another river of storms come through, because it doesn't have to be in the rainy season like it used to be. Now the season can come at any time.
Yeah. And let me ask you this, Dr. Warren. In the floodplain areas, because I remember looking at a building over on Imperial, and the one thing that someone said to me, you'll never be able to purchase that property and get insurance on it. And I said, why? They said, because it's in a floodplain, and it's below flood level. And the only way that you can get insurance, you're going to have to lift that building up or tear it down and rebuild it. So with all the properties that are in the floodplains that are below the floodplain zone, do we then say that we have to find a way to rebuild those properties to get them up above? Or how do you think we can fix it? Because I don't know if the channel itself can be fixed to then save the things that are below the floodplain.
Well, there are two things here. First of all, the insurance companies are no longer writing those policies.
Yeah.
So those people can't even buy it no matter how much money they have.
Exactly.
The second thing is that in any municipal scenario where you have the situation like you're describing, and they had that happen in New Orleans, and this happened in Florida in some places that were low-lying areas and the water came in, the government has the option by eminent domain to go in and buy the land up and take the land, give the money to the owners, and let them relocate. We're doing that in Alaska in terms of some of the natives where rising sea levels have washed villages out, and they had to remove people and resettle them in other areas. The areas they resettle in are not always the best ones to be in, but that's what's going on. And so we don't know if we haven't heard the city talk about buying homes yet in terms of doing that. But and I don't see the homes being sold if you can't get insurance when the insurance is a part of the settlement transaction.
So basically, that might be one of the focus that we do need to focus on is the property even viable anymore?
Yes. That
You know what I'm
gets to be,
saying?
yes.
Because we can rebuild all we want to, but if it's not viable, it's uninsurable, then we're putting them back right into harm's way if we cannot get a flood channel that is going to really be able to sustain if we have another atmospheric river.
And it's even more difficult, Dr. Thompson, some of these homes are like second, third generation properties. They represent the wealth building element in families. And so people don't want to give up homes where their memories and experiences are. And so that's very difficult. But something is going to have to give in terms of what's taking place because people are still out of their homes. They had to tear the walls and things down to the frame so they could treat the wood and get the mold out. And now there's this cost with contractors and exorbitant prices and stuff going on coming in to just put it back together.
Now, Dr. Warren, just for point of clarification, how many homes were actually damaged and lost?
I thought I saw a number of something like 270 some
Okay.
properties, and that's just off the top of my head. I remember that number. I think it was about 270.
Yeah.
But it was enough for people to be severely impacted. Families have been dislocated, displaced, and
Yeah.
so whether it's one or the 270, it's just as serious to the people who are the victims of it.
Yeah. And so I think that as we look at the flood preparation and things of that nature, we're literally going to have to say, what is the game plan if we're going to always fight a losing cause?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? The one thing that when Jackie Robinson was rebuilt, the first thing that the builder told her when they were doing the plan, you have to raise this up 6 feet higher than where you had your original building, or you won't be able to get insured because you're below the floodplain channel.
Well, they did raise it higher, and as a result of that, only the field that's below that area flooded as a result, and not the building itself. So they came out pretty good in terms of it. You know, Dr. Thompson, with the budget that was passed, we did get community things restored, the equity grants, dollars are back in there. I think that we need to be about the implementation of this. There are jobs available at the city. They're not really being promoted and making people aware that they're there. And this is a time that we need to really get busy. There have been times like this in the past when our kids finished school. There were no jobs for them. There are jobs now. The mayor has implemented a part of a plan that I proposed many years ago in terms of putting people to work. So that work there. Mr. Young is doing an outstanding job of rebuilding workforce partnership. We have a plan that will allow kids to have free trolley transportation between the ages of, I think, 16 and 22 or 3. So they won't have to spend what dollars they earn working just on transportation, getting to or from work. So we have some good things that are coming, but we still have a lot more that we need to look at and we need to do.
So one of the biggest things that, if we were to say a message, you must be involved, not just involved in your local community politics and involvement, but also in your local, your state, and your national. You have to watch it all at this point. You have to be involved, and I want to say, and we must engage our young people and get them cognizant of what is really taking place because they're so, for the lack of better words, impressed with Hollywood antics that they're either not voting or voting for the wrong way.
Well, this is true. You know, Dr. Thompson, maybe we try once more with our call. If there's anyone in these remaining minutes that has a question or comment for us, the number is 858-251-6111, or on the internet is godradio1.com. And so we still have time if there's a question or a comment
Yeah.
that any of you would like to extend to us. We'll be very willing to engage in that dialogue for the moments we have remaining.
Well, Dr. Warren, let's go to your editorial this week while we're waiting.
Well, this week at my editorial, I really go out of my way to remind some of what Jim Crow was and what it was like. Mm-hmm. Jim Crow came about following the war. We had a court decision, 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, and it was a stage situation where a very light-skinned black person, mulatto, was put on a train in a white passenger car. He was asked to move. He didn't. The court went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court wrote a decision that said that separate but equal was okay as a prevailing opinion. And what became the opinion of the 1954 Board of Education, Brown versus Education case, was the dissenting opinion in 1896. And so what happened was, we know that Rutherford B. Hayes, as an effort to reconstitute the South and reunite it, he made some deals. The whole idea was states' rights. That was the buzzword. Mm-hmm. So states, you can pass any laws that you want to handle the colored issue, mm-hmm. and we're not going to interfere if it's not federal. That mentality prevailed all through the turn of the century, because we had a number of black congressmen by 1900. The last one out was Roy Lynch, and then we did not have another black member of Congress until 1918 when Oscar DePriest was elected from Chicago. And so in that time, we had the springing up of the dual water fountains and doors and all of these things that the raggedy books being passed on to the black students, so that educationally they were never going to be allowed to get caught up. And so all of these things came about. We spent the years since overturning all of that. The 1965 Civil Rights Act under Title VI dealt with public accommodations so that we couldn't discriminate and have a black and a white thing anymore. Mm-hmm. The whole scenario of how people were treated traveling got caught up in the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, so that you couldn't have a rule in Washington, D.C., but segregation across the line in Virginia. And so that came along at the same time we had a Supreme Court case, Heart of Atlanta Motel, that opened all these things up. So now we have a Supreme Court that's bit by bit is trying to overturn what is taking place. They just approved a racially motivated gerrymandering redistricting in South Carolina. All right. And so between Clarence Thomas, Alito, and those people that Trump put on the court, they're not just going to stop with Roe v. Wade. And so Alito and Thomas, who is now the longest serving member of the court, those people are holding on for Trump, because if they hold on until Trump gets to be president and Trump picks their replacement, then the die will be cast to rewrite the Constitution and government for the next 50 years, mm-hmm. which is what they want, which is why it doesn't care if Trump does Stormy Daniel on the steps of the Washington Cathedral. He's going to still get in if they can put him in, because he represents the instrument for the retrograde movement that they have in mind.
Yep, and you always got to ask yourself the question: if you vote for Dumb Donald, then you got to ask yourself where you at. You know what I'm saying? I have to keep on saying that. I refuse to call him Mister anymore because the bottom line is that he has not shown any respect to anybody, and he's not even not showing any respect for anybody except for himself. He don't even show respect to his children.
Well, we don't even want to waste our time on that. We just need to help people understand that if you want to stop Trump, you got to stop those running for office who are supporters of Trump and supported by Trump.
Yeah.
And we've been doing it pretty effectively so far in these various state primaries. We need to continue and accelerate it. And to our one caller, we're not talking about Band-Aids, but you can't do surgery if you don't get the patient on the table. All right. And so when we vote, we put them on the table, and then we can cut them out.
Amen.
All right. That's what we need to do.
Well, Dr. Warren, I think that we've had a very fruitful discussion tonight. I think that as we move forth and we look at what's going to go take place in the near future, we want you to stay tuned. The topics are going to get hotter and hotter as we get into the summer months, mainly because we're going to be bringing people in the studio and putting them on the hot seat and asking real pertinent questions. So if you would like to see somebody here and here at from the desk of the editor, we're going to ask that you would just put suggestions up, what you want us to talk about, what things you want to hear about so that we can cover it in our time. Any final saying?
Yeah, I want to remind people that this Saturday will start the Juneteenth celebrations. It'll be June 15th, and it's the Saturday before next Wednesday, which is actually June 19th. Mm-hmm. And as you might not remember or know, but Juneteenth represented that day, those 2.5 years, I believe, after the Emancipation Proclamation, when Granger rode into Galveston, Texas, to let the slaves there know that they had been freed. And since they couldn't exactly get the date right, instead of saying June 18th, 19th, they just said Juneteenth. Mm-hmm. So the celebration has grown in California because so many people have come here from Texas. It's growing around the country. So we have, the Voice and Viewpoint has online a list of activities celebrating Juneteenth, from the Cooper family reunion in the park there in Logan Heights, which is important, to celebrations at the Oak Park Library. La Mesa has Juneteenth activities, and we've got events going on. Next week we have a special Juneteenth Day at the George Stevens Senior Center, and so get involved. The Juneteenth flag, which we fought for several years ago before the pandemic, is going to go up at City Hall, I understand, on the 17th.
Yes.
Okay, and that
Which
will
is
be
Monday.
on Monday, all right? And hopefully this time we can fly that flag without having the rainbow flag fly with it, as if one can't fly without the other one.
Yes, and this to let everybody know that our golf tournament that is taking place, it will be on Monday, this coming Monday, and we're pretty much sold out. So if anybody would like to come and volunteer and be a part of our volunteer corps, please let us know. Hit us up here at the station. But we've been very fortunate. We partnered with, or was invited into it by the Black Golfers Association. This is their 4th annual, and every year they select 2 nonprofits to make donations to. And thank God this year we were one of them, and very excited. This is my first golf tournament that I've ever been a part of. I might even go out and hit some balls, Dr. Warren.
Oh, you play golf, brother?
But man, I can hit some balls. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
I got some clubs. I've never been on a full course. I've been to the driving range.
Okay.
And had a good time on the driving range.
Okay.
But, my wife said, "You going to bring your clubs out?" I said, "I just might bring my clubs out and try to hit a couple of them until if I get close enough to the hole, I'm good. But if my balls start going all the other ways, I'm like, well, praise the Lord."
Well, I sponsored golf tournaments at Torrey Pines as a part of Gold Coast.
Yeah.
But I never went out. I was there to see them off, and I was there to welcome to the luncheon when they came back. But I don't play golf. Okay.
Dr. Warren, I think we should just go to the driving range one day and just see how we can hit how far we can hit the little white ball.
That's not my thing, but I salute those of you who do. So just by all means, stay informed, stay conscious, be reflective. This is a month of great remembrance from D-Day and all of those that we've lost in the wars, to our own struggle for freedom here and being reminded through Juneteenth that we still aren't free and that we have to continue. Even though I'm not one of his fans, but Thomas Jefferson always said, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. Good night.
With that being said, good night. This is from the desk of the editor. God bless.